Fala pessoal, bem-vindos a mais um Flutter Campinas, dessa vez online. A gente resolveu fazer um evento online para ter essa oportunidade de trazer algum pessoal de fora, para trazer algum conteúdo diferente para vocês. E também a ideia é que a gente podendo fazer os eventos online, a gente consiga ter uma maior frequência de eventos, fica um pouco mais tranquilo para a gente, né, poder organizar com mais tranquilidade os eventos presenciais. Então, não fiquem preocupados, a gente não está mudando para ser apenas online, mas a ideia é intercalar entre eventos online e eventos presenciais para a gente ter essa boa cadência aí. Hoje a gente vai ter uma apresentação bem legal, a gente trouxe Felix Angelov para falar para vocês um pouco sobre o produto que a empresa de trabalho está desenvolvendo, Shorebird. Não vou falar muito sobre isso, porque o Felix está aqui justamente para falar sobre isso. Eu vou apenas passar algumas palavrinhas sobre o evento bem rapidinho, para não gastar muito tempo, e já vou chamar o Felix para o palco para ter o início da nossa apresentação. Então, lembrando todo mundo, esse é o nosso evento do Flutter Campinas, nosso meetup da cidade de Campinas, em São Paulo. Para quem não conhece, a gente, primeira vez participando, a gente faz parte do Flutter Meetup Network, então a gente está dentro da rede de meetups que o Google, o time do Flutter reconhece e dá suporte. E a gente começou em 2020 e estamos aí tentando trazer um conteúdo para a galera. A gente sempre abre para Call for Papers. Esse evento foi uma exceção, porque a gente queria trazer um convidado especial, mas a gente sempre tenta abrir espaço para todo mundo palestrar, então fiquem atentos nos Call for Papers dos próximos eventos que nós tivermos. Se você ainda não conhece, nossos contatos são esses. A gente tem um grupo no Telegram, tem nosso canal no YouTube, que, bom, você está vendo isso aqui, você já conhece o canal, você deve estar assistindo por ele, e o nosso Twitter também, está meio paradinho o Twitter, mas de vez em quando a gente posta algumas informações lá. A nossa talk, como eu comentei hoje, vai ser sobre Shorebird, especificamente o Felix vai falar sobre Code Push em Flutter, usando a ferramenta da empresa Shorebird, que vamos ver logo mais. E para esse evento especial, a gente organizou as perguntas pelo aplicativo Slido. Então, não façam perguntas, podem fazer perguntas pelo chat, mas dê preferência para mandar pelo app, que a gente vai fazer toda a organização por lá, e vamos mostrar as perguntas no final, e o Felix vai responder todas que derem, para responder nos 15 minutos que me sobrarem. Então é isso, agora eu vou passar a falar inglês, vou chamar o Felix para o nosso palco, e vamos embora para a palestra. Hey, Felix.
Hey.
Hey, thanks so much for accepting to give this talk to us.
Thanks for having me, of course.
It's an honor. And the floor is yours. I already presented a little bit, introduced a little bit what you're talking.
Very little.
But anyhow, feel free to introduce yourself, and really the stage is yours. And again, thanks so much for doing this presentation for us.
Sounds great. Well, thanks again for having me. Hi, everyone. As Eric mentioned, my name is Felix. I used to work at BGV, and I recently left to work at Shorebird with Eric and some other folks. And so today I'm going to be doing a quick kind of walkthrough of what I've been working on, what Shorebird is kind of about, do some live demos, and hopefully answer your questions about Shorebird, Code Push, and Flutter, and hopefully at the end of this talk, you can have a better understanding of what Shorebird offers, and you'll have a better sense of how to integrate it into your apps if that's something that you're interested in. So with that being said, I kind of just want to jump in. I didn't really make this like a slide-based presentation. I kind of figured I would walk through everything just as maybe you would if you're just browsing the product, and kind of jump more into the hands-on and interactive pieces instead of just looking at slides. So I have over here our website, shorebird.dev. And basically, the idea behind Shorebird is to build kind of tools that all enterprises will need when they're building apps with Flutter. So Flutter for businesses is kind of how Shorebird is focusing on right now. And Code Push is the first product that we've decided to build just because of how popular and in demand it is. I think Eric mentioned it was like the 25th most upvoted issue in all of GitHub. So there's a lot of demand for a Code Push solution in Flutter, which is why we picked that as the first product to focus on. And basically what our Code Push solution allows you to do is push over-the-air updates to your users so that you can update code in real time. You don't have to resubmit to the App Store for bug fixes and things like that. And our goal with this was that you could integrate Shorebird into your app with very little changes to your code base. No dark code changes are needed. We pretty much do everything for you in terms of setting up Shorebird in your code base. So it's really, really easy to add to your app. I can make this a little bigger. Right now we support any Dart code changes. Soon we're going to have assets changes as well. So if you want to change an image or like a localization file or things like that, that will soon be supported. But at the moment, our services support pushing updates to any Dart code, no native code. So if you want to change like a plugin or if you want to write native code, we cannot support that. So you'll have to resubmit to the App Store and create a new release and everything. But if it's just a Dart code change, Shorebird supports pushing those changes over the air. And we support Android and iOS at the moment. iOS is still in an alpha stage. I'll talk a little bit more about what it will take for iOS to be stable. But you can try them both today. And I will skip the demo since we're kind of going to do the demo together. And in terms of pricing, you can try Shorebird for free. We basically are still tweaking the pricing, but we want to make it so that you can try Shorebird and you only have to pay for the product if you're getting some value out of the product. So that's why we have 1,000 patch installs for free. And then the paid plan comes with 4,000 patch installs. What this currently means, because a lot of people ask, what is a patch install? How do I know how much I'm going to get charged? Again, this is all like brand new and we're working on adjusting all of this. But at the moment, what this means is when you create a patch and you have an over-the-air update, any device that installs that update counts as one patch install. And the Teams plan comes with 4,000 and then you can pay per patch beyond the 4,000. So it can scale with your user base. But we wanted to kind of make it free so that you can try it and you can go up to 1,000 patches without paying us anything, without putting any credit card info or anything in. So you can definitely try it out. And if you're working on a larger team and you feel like these prices don't work for you or you don't like the way that the pricing is done, definitely reach out to us. We have contact info, which I can share. And we're more than happy to work with folks and teams to find pricing that works for you because we don't want the pricing to be a blocker. The pricing was more meant for us to kind of have something that scales as you're using the product more and more. And we recognize that the pricing is probably not perfect at the moment. So just keep that in mind. And beyond that, we're a pretty small team. Like I said, I just joined like a couple of months ago. So it's myself, Eric, Brian, and Kevin. A lot of different expertise and background across our team. Kevin recently joined and he has a background in compilers and language design. And a lot of you probably know Eric Seidel. He was the founder of Flutter and former director of engineering. And then Brian was a former tech lead and did like internal tools for Flutter. So we have a lot of kind of interesting and different backgrounds across our team, which I think helps us move really quickly and complement each other. And that's kind of the highlights. There's a lot of FAQs in here, which I won't bore you with, but definitely check out the site if you're curious about Shorebird and you want to learn more after this talk. Probably most of what I mentioned will be covered in some place here. But with all that said, I kind of just want to show Shorebird because I think the easiest way to understand what it does is just to see a demo of it. And so just pretending like I'm a brand new user, the best way to get started is just to go to shorebird.dev and hit the little sign in button in the corner. And you can authenticate with Google. We're currently only supporting Google Auth, but if that's a deal breaker for you or you want a different kind of OAuth integration, just open an issue and let us know. We just started with Google because it was simple and we figured most people are in the Google ecosystem already. So you can authenticate. I'll just authenticate with my personal account. And at this point, if you have no apps you'll see kind of some basic installation instructions for Shorebird. And so if you're on Mac OS or Linux, you can just copy this command and drop it into your terminal. Same thing for Windows. You can copy this and run it in PowerShell. And with all that, you will basically get to this point where hopefully you have the Shorebird command line installed on your machine. And the Shorebird command line is basically your best friend when it comes to integrating Shorebird into your Flutter apps, pushing a new release or pushing a new patch. Basically, the idea behind the whole CLI architecture was to have it be a drop-in replacement for Flutter. So you can replace your Flutter command with an equivalent Shorebird command so that it's as simple to integrate as possible. You don't have to do a bunch of custom changes to your code base or use really different unfamiliar tooling. You'll see, hopefully, that for the most part, it feels very much like your regular Flutter workflow, except for you run Shorebird commands instead of Flutter commands. And so pretty much once you've gotten to this point where you have Shorebird installed, you can log in, which I believe I've already done. And then in any project, you can initialize Shorebird with a single command. It's just Shorebird init. So I will go ahead and run that in this project. And what that does is it analyzes your code base and it checks things like, does this project contain flavors? Does it contain an Android and iOS project? What's the name of the app? All those things, we can customize all that, but I'm going to leave the default values. It does some additional checks to make sure that you have like network permissions, for example, because Shorebird needs a network or the internet permission in order to actually work properly. And once it's done, all it does is it generates the shorebird.yaml file. And this is just an ID that uniquely identifies your app in Shorebird servers. It's not a secret. You don't have to worry about if anyone sees your app ID. It's not a big deal. It's just to communicate with Shorebird servers. And we recently added another capability, which is you can configure whether or not Shorebird auto updates your app. For now, I'm just going to leave it in the default, which is true. So Shorebird will automatically update in the background when you launch your app. But you can customize that and turn that off and have full control over when and how often you check for updates, which I can talk more about in a bit. But basically, when you run Shorebird init, it just tells Shorebird about your app, adds this YAML file to uniquely identify your app, and then it modifies your pubspec.yaml to include that YAML file in the assets so that when you do a build of your app, it includes the shorebird.yaml file as part of the bundle. And with all that, you should be able to go back to the console and refresh. And now we should see that we have a single app here. It doesn't have any releases and it doesn't have any patches, which is totally fine. But from here, you can manage all the apps that you create in Shorebird by deleting them. I'll show you drilling into more info for releases and that type of thing. And we're also building out the console as we speak. So a lot of this you'll see more and more information in here over time. It's kind of in the very early stages still, but we have our app. And so the next thing to do is create a release. So since this is the first time I just added Shorebird, I will need to create a release. And creating a release, you can think of as like when you're creating a release in Flutter and you're submitting to the App Store. It's the same thing, except for the generated app bundle or IPA contains the Shorebird engine so that your app can check for updates and receive updates over the air. So to create a release, you just use the Shorebird release command. I'll create an Android release first. And that's going to build an app bundle, which can take a little bit. But I want to kind of go through the full process so that everyone kind of sees what the experience is like. So this will take a couple of seconds, but like I said, it's building the app bundle. You can also specify some additional flags if you want to build an APK as well. And before you continue, it prompts you, like, does everything look good? So you can double check the information, make sure that this is the right app that you want to release, make sure that this is the right version. We're publishing for Android, so that all looks good. So I'll hit yes and continue. There's also some flags and documentation for doing this in CI as well. So you can have this run as part of your GitHub workflow or other CI systems. But now that we have a release, it looks like everything succeeded. Normally, you would upload to the Play Store You can see the instructions here. It tells you this is where your app bundle lives. Please upload it to the Play Store, and then you can distribute that binary to your users, and then that version of your app will support code push. But just for the demo, I'm not going to push it or upload it to the Play Store. I'm just going to show you how to preview your changes locally. So if we flip back to the console and refresh, we can see now Shorebird knows about the release. It's 1.0 +1, and it knows that we have Android support. Of course, we have to do iOS as well. And iOS is an alpha, so all the commands for iOS have a -alpha at the end, and you get a nice warning that tells you, hey, heads up, this is an alpha. And while we wait for this build, I want to go over why iOS is an alpha and what to expect when you use iOS. So basically the way iOS works, it's a lot more complicated than Android. And right now, everything when you use Shorebird on iOS runs in an ARM interpreter, which means that all of your code is going to run approximately 7 to 10 times slower, your Dart code. And so that's why it's an alpha. A big reason why the alpha label still is there is because of performance. So you have to keep in mind, if you add Shorebird to your iOS app, you can expect the performance to be significantly slower, which is maybe a big deal if you're using game, or if you're building a game or something that has lots and lots of animations that don't run on the GPU. But if you're building just like a regular app that shows you some details and you can pull some data from an API and display it to users, you might not care so much about that, and it might be okay. So we decided to release as in an alpha state so that folks can try it and give us feedback. We're working on improving the performance. So our goal is that you have near native performance on iOS, hopefully in the next few months. And that's what Kevin is helping us with and working on as we speak. So just keep that in mind. If you do try Shorebird on iOS, make sure you do some benchmarks and make sure you verify the performance on your app before you release it to your users, because it's not what it will be hopefully in the next few months. But anyway, with that disclaimer, you can see that we've published a release for iOS as well. It generated an IPA, and then we have some instructions. Again, normally you would submit this to the App Store, and then your users would download that from the App Store, and then you can push updates to your users. So now if we switch back to the console, we have iOS and Android for our 1001 release, which is great. And no problem, thank you. Thanks for the support. And so now that we have our two releases, what we can do is we can preview those releases on our own, either emulator on Android or physical device for iOS. So I want to go ahead and preview. So let's start on Android. You can preview by running Shorebird preview, and then it's going to list all the apps that you have. In this case, I only have the one, so I'm going to pick that app. It's going to list all the releases that I can preview. In this case, we only have one release. And then we have two platforms that are supported. I want to preview Android. And so that should pull down the app bundle that we uploaded to Shorebird servers and run it on my emulator so that I have the exact version of Shorebird that has everything configured. And we can see the logs here. And this app is just an example app that we have, which I'll show the link to in a second. But the nice thing about this app is it lets me check for updates. So I can hit this button, and it's going to ask Shorebird servers, hey, is there a patch available? And right now, there's no update available, which is what we expect. But we'll push an update in a second. Before we do that, I want to also preview on iOS. So let's build for iOS. And I have my actual iOS device here. So it's the same kind of flow. It's going to pull down the IPA or the runner.app from Shorebird servers and run it on my device so that it has everything set up properly. And it's installing, and it should look very similar to the Android one. Again, these are all release builds. And so I can check for updates on iOS as well. And again, we have no updates available. That's totally fine. That's what we expect. But we have both of these running now. So let's push some updates. So this is just a regular Flutter app, nothing special. We just have a material app. We can go ahead, for example, and change the color from red to blue. We can change some text. Again, like any dark code is fair game. Maybe let's add an exclamation mark here. And yeah, that looks good. Obviously, you can go crazy and customize things. Maybe actually, let's make this even more of a change, and let's give it some dark mode by default, so that we can kind of see a bigger change between the current app. And I think that looks good. So once you've saved the changes that you want to make, you can use Shorebird patch to submit patches. And yeah, we want to do it for 1.0. And so this is going to build a new version of your app, and it's going to pull down the release, and it's going to diff them so that your patch only contains the diff between your released version and what you've changed, and you're not shipping the full, whatever, couple of megabytes every single time. Instead, it's going to be relatively small. We can actually probably make those sizes even smaller. But yeah, that's kind of the current process, is just a really dumb binary diff. So you can see our diff sizes are like 27, 28 kilobytes. And everything looks good. So I'm going to hit yes. And this is for Android. So on Android, we have a patch. We can check that on the console. Actually, we can't check that on the console yet. That's coming soon. But we can check that in our app. So now I'm coming back to the same Android app that we ran with Shorebird Preview, and I'm going to check for update. And we do see that there's an update available, so I'm going to hit download. The patch is ready, so I'm going to restart the app, and we have our blue app with a dark background, and we changed the text to say Shorebird code push demo, so we can see that that worked nicely. And I can do the same thing for iOS. Oops. So again, it's going to ask me what version, and it's going to build. iOS is not diffing yet, so the patches are really, really big compared to Android, but that's something we're going to hopefully fix in the next few days or weeks. So patch sizes will be small on iOS as well. But yeah, that's another reason why iOS is still in alpha, because there's a lot of these things that still need to be optimized. So yeah, this is just doing its usual, basically it's doing a Flutter build IPA under the hood. So it can take some time, Xcode isn't always the fastest. But yeah, so far we've seen it work on Android, and hopefully in a second we'll see our update on iOS as well. And once that's done, I kind of want to talk a little bit about documentation and just how things are set up. Like looking at the GitHub organization of the repository. And if anyone has any questions, be sure to drop them in the link that was shared at the beginning, and I'm happy to answer any questions. But here you can see the iOS patch size is huge. It's 4.5 megabytes. Like I said, that will become much, much smaller in the near future. But for now, we're not diffing, which is why it's so big. And now, moment of truth, let's launch our app. Let's check for updates. Updates available on iOS. Let's download it. And then let's restart the app. And yay, we have code push working on both iOS and Android. And we can see in the console, if I refresh, that we have 2 patches for this app available. Again, we're going to surface more information in the console in the near future, so you can view the individual patches, get more information about how many installs those patches received. You can roll back things in the near future. There's going to be a lot of things that we add to the console in the near future, so this will have a lot more that you can control from here. And another thing while we're in the console that I figured we can call out is you can go to this account tab, and it'll show you info about the plan that you're on. So the hobby plan is just the free tier that doesn't cost anything, and it includes the 1,000 patch installs. This number that you see here isn't going to be in real time. We really, I think it's every hour roughly that we get updates on patch installs. So just keep that in mind, that this isn't a real time, like down to the minute value. But this kind of gives you a good overview of how many patches you've used, what plan you're on, when your plan renews, if you're on the paid plan, that type of thing. So you can check out the account section of the console for all of that. And I think that is basically the demo. One thing that I didn't mention that is probably worthwhile mentioning in this app, this is all open source, and this app is using our Shorebird code push package, which is published on pub.dev. And that allows you to talk to the Shorebird updater and control things like check whether or not, or check what patch number is currently installed, if there is any patch installed, check for updates, see if there's a new patch available. We have some integration with this like restart app package to show you how you could implement like the restart behavior that you saw in the demo. There's a lot of things that you could do to customize how updates are surfaced. Like we have a banner in this example, but you can do something totally different and custom. It's not really, Shorebird is not opinionated at all about any of that stuff. It's just giving you the hooks so that you can query that information yourself. But yeah, this is just a pretty simple one-page Flutter app that you can find at on GitHub. So from shorebird.dev, there are links to our Discord, our Twitter, and our GitHub. And if you head over to GitHub, that particular demo that I showed is part of the updater repository. And inside of updater, we have the Shorebird code push Dart package, which is the one that's on pub.dev. And then that one has an example, which is what I'm running right now. So if you want to check out this exact same demo on your own machine, you can clone this repo and do the exact same steps that I did to reproduce the demo. And again, you can find the Shorebird code push package on pub.dev, and you can check that out. But you don't need to use it. By default, if you don't have the Shorebird code push package and you just have a regular vanilla Flutter app, what will happen is when you launch the app, the Shorebird engine will check if there's an update available. And if there is, it'll install it in the background. And then the next time you launch the app, it will boot from the patch instead of from the original release. So it's kind of that like async background update behavior that you get by default. And you can customize that, like I mentioned, in the shorebird.yaml. If you uncomment this line and disable auto updates, then Shorebird will not automatically check for updates, and it will be up to you to manually do all the update checking logic that you want using the Shorebird package. So it's really flexible and up to you. Depends on what behavior you're interested in for your users. And yeah, so I think that's kind of hopefully going to give you a good overview of how Shorebird works, how you can add it to your project. We have a lot of docs as well. So if you scroll down to the bottom of our website, we have a link to the documentation. There's also a link to it in the console if you hit docs. And in here, there's a lot of guides on like a quick start that kind of goes over what I just did, basically like creating an app, initializing Shorebird, creating a release, all that stuff. We also have guides for if you're using add to app. So if you're adding Flutter to a native iOS or Android app, you can still use Shorebird in those cases. We have some guides for how you can do that. Also, I know like at VGV and a lot of companies, they like using flavors. So you can have like a dev, staging, production flavor of your app. And you can use Shorebird with flavors as well. We have guides for iOS and Android on that, so you can check that out. We also have full guides on how to release to the App Store with Shorebird. So they include like screenshots and like step-by-step instructions for how to upload everything to the App Store and Play Store, so you can follow along. And as I mentioned earlier, we have GitHub workflow integrations. So we do have a GitHub action that will allow you to set up Shorebird in your GitHub workflows, and then you can use Shorebird commands in GitHub. And really, like the only thing that you need to do differently for CI is you need to authenticate using Shorebird login :CI. And what that will do is it will give you a Shorebird token that you can add as a secret for your to your repo that you can access in your workflow. And yeah, and then all the commands will authenticate using that Shorebird token. And you can create releases, you can push patches, you can automate a lot of those things in CI, depending on if you're pushing to a release branch or creating a tag, or even like a manual workflow that you can click a button to trigger. It's really up to you. And we also have a guide on integrating with CodeMagic as well. If you use CodeMagic to manage your releases, you can also check out the CodeMagic guide. So I highly recommend going through the guides if you're interested and you have some more like special cases like add to app or flavors, or if you want to, if you're new to creating releases and uploading to the App Store, I definitely recommend checking out the docs. We also have some troubleshooting sections in here. So if you're stuck on something or you're seeing an error, definitely check the troubleshooting and FAQ section, because we might have answered your question here. We try to answer the really common ones in here. But if you can't find an answer to your question, we work pretty much only on Discord in the open and on GitHub in the open. So you can either open an issue on GitHub, or you can join our Discord and drop your question in Discord. And as long as someone's awake, we will do our best to answer you as quickly as possible. So definitely, if you're interested in trying out Shorebird and giving feedback or getting your questions answered, you should check out the Discord. And I think that's kind of a good overview of the docs. And I think the only other thing to call out is just how Shorebird works. So if you head over to our organization on GitHub, it's just Shorebird Tech. You can see there's a lot of repos. The main one is just Shorebird, and this contains a bunch of different packages. So the main things in here that are probably like things that you'll interact with are the Shorebird CLI, and maybe indirectly the code push client. So the CLI is the thing that you'll install and use from your terminal, and then the code push client is the library that exposes APIs to talk to the Shorebird backend. So you can check that out if you're interested. You don't really need to use this directly. It's handled by the CLI for you, but if you're curious, you can check it out. And then the updater is the other interesting part. So the way Shorebird works is there's a Rust updater, which gets compiled into the Flutter engine that Shorebird ships with. And that updater handles checking for updates, installing the updates. So we had to maintain the updater, maintain a fork of the Flutter engine. And for iOS, we have a fork of the Dart SDK as well. So there's a lot of pieces involved, but for the most part, everything is open source. The main piece that's not open source is the backend, and that may be open source in the near future. But for now, that's really the only piece that's not public on GitHub. So you can check out all the different pieces here, our fork of Flutter, and our fork of the engine. We have some Shorebird samples, like I mentioned. So add to app and flavors are the two samples that we have, and this will grow over time. But yeah, if you see any problems in any of these, or if you have any questions, feel free to just open an issue. And we're generally pretty quick about trying to answer folks' questions. And yeah, I think that's basically Shorebird in a nutshell. So I guess I'll stop there and then maybe answer some questions if people have them. And if there's anything else you want me to go more in detail, I'm more than happy to. But I think that's a good overview of Shorebird.
Awesome, Felix. Thanks a lot. It was like a really, really awesome overview on Shorebird, and like a lot of information in like a small amount of time.
Yeah. Hopefully I didn't talk too fast.
Yeah, no, I think it was pretty awesome. Since I don't know if everyone knows me, just a quick presentation. I also help on the Flutter Meetup at Campinas, like to organize it. So I'm here with Eric as well. And I'll share my screen so we can check the questions. Like there's a lot of questions.
Oh, nice.
Let me know if I can get. Yeah, it's hard to. So you, like people that are watching us, you can join on slido.com and set this Flutter Campinas ID, so you can join the and send questions here, and you can also vote by tapping the thumbs up icon. So like the most voted questions will go up, and they'll probably be the ones that we'll be able to answer here. So Okay, I think we can start on the first one. So what do the docs mean by 4K patch installs per month? Is it my updates to your server with new code or my users install of this new code?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We get that question all the time, and that's part of why I said we're still adjusting the pricing. Right now, what that means is it means the second one, it means user installs on a device. So for example, if you have 1,000 active users for your app and you push one patch, then you can assume you'll use approximately 1,000 patch installs if all of your users launch the app and pull down the update. We're probably going to shift more towards a monthly active user pricing model so that the same user can install multiple patches and that doesn't count against you. And so that it's more just scaling as your user base scales. But that's something that we're currently in the middle of adjusting. But like I said, if pricing is at all a problem for you, or you're concerned that your company wants to use the service, but the pricing model doesn't work for you, definitely contact us. The email that you can reach out to is just contact@shorebird.dev. Or you can just message us on Discord and we can set up some time to chat with you one-on-one and learn about what your needs are. We do not want pricing to be a blocker for people. It's just, we had to come up with some price and we tried our best to come up with something that seemed reasonable, but it most likely will change in the near future. So we just want to get feedback from people basically and adjust the price as we get more customers.
Perfect. Okay, so how do you guys guarantee the security of the server? I mean, how to guarantee that my code will not be changed by others?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, what we do is we actually hash the artifacts that get uploaded to our server, and then the Shorebird updater verifies the integrity of the patches before trying to boot from that patch, and that will help with like man in the middle, or if something got corrupt while you were pulling down the patch on the user's device, because we really wanted to make it so that in the worst case, we don't make the user experience any worse than like you don't get a patch in the worst case. We don't want to brick people's apps or crash people's apps or anything like that. So we are currently hashing and verifying the integrity of patches before applying them. There's a lot of other things that we plan to do in the future in terms of security, but again, our priority right now is based on our customers' needs and what people are asking for. So if you need additional security checks in order for your team to adopt Shorebird, definitely, again, reach out to us on Discord or open an issue. Folks were asking about obfuscation support as well, and Shorebird doesn't care if your Dart code is obfuscated or not. So you can obfuscate your Dart code just as usual. Again, like our whole goal was for it to be kind of a drop-in replacement for Flutter so that you don't have to change anything drastic with your app. So ideally, whatever workflow you already have of deploying your releases to the App Store, you can keep that almost exactly the same and just replace a few Flutter commands with a few Shorebird commands and everything else stays the same. But yeah, if security is a big concern for you and your team and there are additional checks that you need, definitely let us know. That's something that we are planning on building up over time and as our customers request more and more features. So good question.
Nice. With this question, do you guys have like something on the documentation that covers all of those security?
Yeah. There should be in the FAQs. I'll find a link and maybe I can share this link, a bunch of these links with you, and then you can include them in the video later or in the description of the.
Yeah. We can add on the description. Yeah, it'd be great. Awesome.
Yep.
Okay. So next one, how Shorebird works with native code, method channel, and what are the scenarios that you don't indicate the use of Shorebird? I think the first one you answered kind of works more with Dart, but
yeah, we do not support native code. So if you want to change native code, you can't use Shorebird to create a patch. We actually have checks in Shorebird that will do a diff and see if you changed any native code. And if you did change native code, we'll give you a big warning that says, hey, you changed X, Y, and Z. Like, are you sure you want to push this patch? And so we have those checks in place to warn you, because we cannot actually run the native code. Only Dart code and assets will be supported by Shorebird. Like I mentioned, assets is coming soon. But yeah, if you want to change any native code, you'll just have to create a new release. So you can just bump your PubSpec version and then run Shorebird release and then resubmit to the App Store. So if you're changing a plugin or if you're writing your own method channels and working with Swift or Kotlin, you'll have to actually create a new release. You can't push those as over-the-air updates.
Cool. So even like if we upgrade some plugin, it will know about it and it will like show some warning.
If the plugin changed native code, like you might get lucky and the plugin just changed like Dart code and tests or something. But if the plugin contained native code changes, then you'll see a warning. So yeah, you can kind of rely on the Shorebird tooling to tell you if native code changed if you're not sure. But yeah, just keep that in mind. You have to create new releases and wait for App Store reviews, just as you normally would if you make changes to native code.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so about Apple Store reviews, I think this one is one that you guys probably get a lot as well. So did you have trouble with Apple policies to make code push for iOS possible?
Well, so right now we're basically in the like Shorebird is compliant in terms of App Store policies. Like that's why we run everything in an ARM interpreter, and we're following the criteria that the App Store has for executing code that's downloaded over the air. So in that regard, there is no problem with App Store policies. But again, this is just a tool. It's definitely possible for people to misuse the tool. And for example, push an update that changes your app drastically, like from a to-do app to like a gambling app or something, right? And like then that you're clearly violating the App Store policy. And that's kind of up to the team and the developer to make sure that you're using this to kind of fix bugs quickly or fix crashes quickly or improve like quality of your app quickly. That's kind of what the tool is meant for. And it's not guaranteed that you're not going to run into Apple policies and rejections for reasons that are beyond the tooling. It really depends on how you use the tool. But in terms of the technical details, the way it's implemented complies with Apple policies in terms of executing code, so there should be no trouble. And we've actually uploaded apps to the Play Store and App Store that use Shorebird just for demos and things like that, and we've had no issues so far. So from that standpoint, it should be fine, but it really just depends on if you're abusing it to kind of circumnavigate checks in the App Store. And we highly recommend just thinking of it as like a fallback for if you accidentally push a bug that's impacting like millions of users, or if you have a crash that is like really destroying your user experience on your app and you don't want to wait 3 or 4 days or whatever it is for App Store reviews. Those are the cases where something like Shorebird is really, really useful to have. But it's not meant to kind of like game the system and skip reviews for the App Store. So, and you also still have to do the initial release anyway and get your app reviewed. So you have to still go through that process anyway if you decide to go through distribution through the App Store. So just keep that in mind. Like you're not skipping the App Store review. You're just making it easier to push fixes and small improvements without waiting a long period of time in between. So, but if you have any more questions on that, we do cover that in the docs. And I know Eric was planning on writing like an even more detailed piece of documentation around App Store policies. So you'll probably see that in the next few weeks is my guess. But yeah, we try to cover this in the current documentation, and it'll probably be like even more detail in the coming weeks. So you can keep an eye out for that. That's probably the number one question that we get asked. So yeah.
Awesome. Just out of curiosity, do you guys have like any demo app that we can download on App Store, or plans on having that?
Let me double check, because Eric had a demo that he used for FlutterCon, and it was kind of ironic because he submitted it to the App Store and then it didn't get approved in time for the conference. And so it wasn't ready for the conference, but he did submit an app. So let me double check and I can share that link with you. We do have another one called Time Shift. I'll drop the link to the GitHub, and it's published on the App Store as well. But let me double check and get back to you on, because there was like a FlutterCon demo that Eric created a while ago, just specifically for that in mind. So I can get you that information and you can maybe distribute it later. But yeah, we do have at least 2, I think, apps right now that are published, and hopefully we'll continue to expand that over time. The challenge for us is finding a good app to kind of maintain. So if you have any ideas, maybe a game is probably something that could be cool to have as a demo. But if you have ideas, or if you or your teams are using Shorebird in production and you want to share links, let us know. We'd love to see them and maybe create like a showcase page or something. But yeah, we do have a couple. I'll share the info with you after this.
Okay, perfect. I'll share with everyone. Okay, next one. Can I split my Flutter code and use Shorebird only part of the project?
I'm not sure what this person means, but if you mean like, can you have different modules in your project? You should be able to. I think it just depends on how you integrate things. Like, for example, I mentioned we support add to app. So with add to app, you can create a bunch of different Flutter apps and tie them into a native app at different points, and you can push updates to any of those Flutter pieces independently. So Shorebird doesn't really care about any of that. It really just depends on how you want to do the integration piece. But really, you are in full control over what you change when you do patches and how often you publish those patches. So I'd say for most cases, it's pretty flexible, and it just depends on if you want it to be like something that you rely on all the time, or if it's just like a safety thing that you keep as like a plan B if something goes wrong in production. But yeah, I'm not 100% sure I answered the question because I probably need more information on what this person means by split my Flutter code. So if that was your question and you want to provide more context, I can try to come back to it. Oh, we're considering using it in a future app after iOS is stable. Awesome.
Nice. I think I sent a similar question, and I had this question. I don't know if it's like what this person meant, but like I was thinking of, and I don't know if there's a difference on that, but like having for instance, I would like to have just a specific feature that supports code push. So like I can use it maybe even for some kind of background driven content or something. Like I can like decide moving my button somewhere else because of something I needed, but I don't want like to make my whole project depend on code push. I just want like a small Flutter module to depend on that. So that's possible if I.
So for the like depending on code push, you don't have to depend on anything. You can add the dependency to the Shorebird code push package if you want to customize how often updates are done, or if you want to manually like download an update and control that. But you can just run Shorebird in your app and never touch any code in your project. And the nice thing is, if you build it using Flutter build, then there's no Shorebird in it. And if you build it using Shorebird release, then Shorebird is integrated. So it's kind of up to you if you want to turn on or off Shorebird, and everything kind of handles those cases gracefully. So if Shorebird engine is not available, nothing will happen. You just won't receive updates. And so it's meant to be like super non-invasive. So you don't need to change much in your app. But yeah, if you only want to use like the Shorebird code push package in some module of your app, you can definitely only add it to that module and only use it in that module. The thing that Shorebird requires right now is for you to tell our servers about your app. So you still have to tell Shorebird like, hey, this app exists, and this is, and then Shorebird tells you the ID for your app. So that's really all that Shorebird cares about, is just knowing that your app exists and how to identify your app. But other than that, you don't have to change your dependencies or add any new dependencies to your app. And if you don't want Shorebird in your app, you just go back to using Flutter commands instead of Shorebird commands, and then you won't have Shorebird built into your app. So hopefully that answers your question. But if there's cases that Shorebird doesn't support that are really important for you or your team, again, just let us know on Discord or open an issue. This is part of why we want to have our feature development be driven by customers and real world use cases. We don't want to assume that people are going to use it a certain way. We want to actually share stuff as early as possible so we can get real feedback on how people want to use it. Or if they don't care about certain features, then we won't build them, or we'll build them later. So again, if there's a case that you think is a blocker for your team, or a specific way that you want to integrate Shorebird that we don't support, just open an issue.
Perfect. I think this one you probably answered already, but what happens if for some reason the client can download the patch completely? Could it fall into a broken state?
Yeah, so the worst thing that could happen is if the download fails, then we'll just retry and it's not a problem. But if for some reason you change native code and you accidentally push the patch and you get a patch that's in an incompatible state with your release, the worst thing that could happen is Shorebird will try to run that patch, and then your app will crash, and then Shorebird will mark that patch as bad, and then it will go back to running the previous healthy version of your app. So the worst thing that can happen if you ignore the warnings and you push a bad patch is you get a single crash and then a rollback. But if the download just fails because of the internet, then it'll just retry the next time you launch the app, and it's not going to interfere with your users. So it's really just those cases where you force push and you accidentally changed some native code that could cause a broken state, and that's a temporary broken state that will roll back. And yeah, I hope that answers your question. The download shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, and it's one crash on all users, right? So
it's one crash per launch. And so what you could do in that case is, if you realize, oh shoot, I accidentally published a bad patch, you can publish another patch to fix the bad patch. And then the users that didn't ever launch the bad patch, they'll never launch the bad patch. So it's only while that bad patch is the latest patch, it will impact users who are launching the app one time, and then the rollback will happen. And hopefully over time, I think rollback is a highly requested feature. So that's something that in the future, you'll probably be able to mark it as bad in the console, and then people won't actually receive that patch anymore. And so we'll probably build out more fancy tools and UI to view analytics on bad patches and marking things as bad and that type of thing. But yeah, for now, the worst thing that could happen is one crash and then a rollback to the previous version. And the nice thing is we never overwrite the base release that you submitted to the App Store. So that's always going to be a fallback. If you only submit one patch and it's a bad patch, then you'll fall back to the clean release that was submitted to the App Store. So good question, though. And again, this is all in the updater. So if you have more questions on any of that stuff, you can check out. All that is open source, all that logic and all that code.
Cool. Okay, this one is mine. So do you have any recommendations on how to use code push? You sort of answered that, on using with bug fixes, but not trying to give the answer you guys, if I got it right, when people should use it and decide how to use it better. So I don't know. And this is one question. And for instance, is it more performant for small bugs or changes? Mm-hmm. Or is it okay to push a whole feature? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the use case. I think you probably will be okay as long as you're not significantly altering your app and like bypassing reviews from like a malicious standpoint. If you're just like fixing a bug, or you're, I don't know, changing the theme, or you're like improving something slightly for your users, I think that's really where it comes down to make sure you're familiar with the App Store policies, and make sure that you're not kind of abusing something like code push to skip App Store reviews. But I think generally, as long as you're like kind of keeping all that in mind, it doesn't, from a performance standpoint, Shorebird doesn't care if it's a small bug fix or if it's a whole feature. Shorebird doesn't care. The only thing that will vary is the size of the patch. Obviously, if it's like a tiny bug fix, then the patch sizes will be probably smaller than if you're shipping a whole feature. But technically, Shorebird doesn't care about that stuff. I would say it really just depends on if you're like sidestepping the App Store review process or not. So if you're trying to skip the App Store review process for malicious reasons, then don't do that, obviously. And I think obviously bug fixes and those types of small improvements are probably no-brainer. Like you can use Shorebird for all of those. If you're changing a huge part of your app, then I think it's a gray area, and it just depends on your app and what your app does and how much you're changing and that type of thing. And it's really a case-by-case basis. So I'd say just if you're not sure and if you're concerned, then the best thing to do is just create a new release and wait for the App Store review. But if you're doing something small or something that's not altering what your app does significantly, then it's totally fine to use Shorebird. So sorry, and it's hard to answer that question because it really depends on it depends on the case.
Got it. But like just on the performance point of view, if we like have like a big patch, it won't impact on the app startup time or something, because patch it asynchronously and
thread. Yeah, it's done in the background on a separate thread, so it doesn't affect launch times. You actually reminded me, there is a performance hit on iOS. So right now, like I mentioned, iOS is always slow. As soon as you add Shorebird to your iOS app, you automatically make your app like 10 times slower. All your Dart code becomes 10 times slower. And so in the future, what we eventually want to get to is where all of your code that you submitted to the App Store runs at native performance, and only the code that you've patched runs 7 or 10 times slower. So we're working on building like a linker and other tooling that will basically identify, hey, I haven't changed this code path, so I'm going to run the native executable, and I have changed this code path, so I'm going to run it through the ARM interpreter. So if you do technically like redo your entire app on iOS and push it as a patch, then your entire app will run again in this interpreted mode, which will be slower than if you were running it from the App Store release. So even in the future, once we optimize iOS for performance, the larger your patches are, the more of your app is going to run in that interpreter. So you should keep that in mind. Ideally, you want to keep it just to like things that are critical for you to get out immediately. And then for things that aren't that critical, just go through the regular process if you're not in a rush. And I mean, sometimes App Store reviews are pretty short and like less than a day. So hopefully it's not too bad. But if it's something that's like super, super urgent, then I would say like those are really, really good cases for using code push. Thanks for reminding me. Keep that in mind on iOS. And we'll write more documentation on this as we go. It's still really early for iOS, but at least if you try iOS today on Shorebird, it will never be slower than it is today. It will only get faster. So
nice. And like you mentioned, iOS performs, but on Android, it's running like 1-to-1.
Yeah, it's pretty much 1-to-1 on Android. Yep.
Yeah, nice.
And as we add more platforms, there'll be different like caveats for each platform. But yeah, iOS is a lot more difficult, and there were a lot like the architecture of how it works on iOS is very different than how it works on Android. So it is very much a platform by platform thing. So yeah, again, I'm sure we'll write extensive docs on this, especially by the time iOS is stable. There'll be a lot of good documentation on this. And yeah, you can expect that, like I said, the performance on iOS will get much, much better. But like, you have to keep in mind that every time you push a patch, in order for it to comply with the App Store, it's not going to be as fast as signed executable code that you submit to the App Store. So it's going to be slower anyway, no matter what we do. So
yeah, cool. But thanks on sharing the plans on that. Like
yeah, you can follow along. Like a lot of that stuff will be. That's what we're focusing on. Like, I think getting iOS performance to as close as possible to Android performance is our #1 priority. And so we are working on that like right now, and hopefully within the next few weeks or months, depending on how things go, we'll have an iOS stable release that addresses most of these performance issues. So yeah, that's the #1 thing on our to-do list.
Awesome. So I think more like 5 minutes on questions. We answered like a lot of questions.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So another one I sent. Is there a way to identify a specific version so an error can be sent to some monitoring tool and be reproduced?
Can you clarify a specific version of your app or of Shorebird or?
Yeah. So like here we at my company we use Sentry, for instance, and when some error happens, we get the stack trace and everything on Sentry.
Yeah.
But we usually identify it as like the version 1.0.1, and you can like reproduce the issue going to like a tag on GitHub and running the app, and like we'll be sure that that's the version. But with Shorebird, we put the new layer on top of that. So there's a way to.
Yeah, I understand your question. Yeah, so with the Shorebird code push package that's available on pub.dev, you can get the patch that's currently running, if there is a patch running. So then you can build the full version, like 1.0.0 plus 1, and then patch number 2 or patch number 5 or whatever. So you should be able to trace it back to a tag still. But yeah, you can get that information by adding the Shorebird code push package as a dependency. And if you don't have any patches installed, it will tell you that you have no patches installed and you're just running the vanilla release version of your app. So yeah, you should still have enough information to figure out exactly what version of your app is on the user's device.
Okay, so we can have like the patch hash, and we can like send it as an information when pushing some error to Sentry, for instance.
It won't be the hash of the patch. At least currently, there's no hash. It's the unique patch number. So every time you create a patch, it starts at 0 and just is an auto incrementing number. So you'll know, like, I'm on release 100, build number 1, patch number 5. And so you should still have everything you need to uniquely identify what version of the patch or what version of your app with what patch is running. If you need more information, definitely let us know. But I think that should be enough information to figure out exactly what version of the code is running on that device. And again, that's from the Shorebird code push package on pub.dev.
Yeah, awesome.
Great question.
Yeah, thanks for the answer. Okay, so how is security guaranteed at the upgrade time? Could a man in the middle? Oh, okay, I think we answered that.
Yeah, I think we talked about that. Again, if security is a concern, just reach out to us. There's a lot more we could do from a security standpoint, and we likely will do. It's just a matter of when. So if that's something that's a blocker for you and your team, definitely just reach out to us, and we will prioritize accordingly. So yeah.
Awesome. Cool. So another one about the app stores, something that we might be concerned. I think it's mostly how to use it, like not push some malicious code. So,
yeah, just keep in mind, no native code, no assets yet. Assets are coming soon. And then, yeah, don't do anything that will violate the App Store policy, like change what your app does without an App Store review, or like redo your entire app and then push an over-the-air update without an App Store review. Those types of things will probably get you rejected or like flagged on the App Store. So just use the tool the way it's meant to be used, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, and for native code and assets, you probably see a warning or something when
you'll see a warning for assets and native code. Soon, assets we will support, so you can change assets and it won't be a problem. But yeah, anytime you create a patch that has code that we don't support, we'll tell you. You'll see a warning in the terminal, and then you can decide if you want to override it and ignore the warning, which I do not recommend. But you will see a warning. So yeah, it should be obvious.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Thanks. Yeah. So last one, is we have like a lot more. Yeah. So Shorebird is open source. How does that work in practice? You sort of went through it, right?
I think it's great because there's a lot we can do to make it easier for people to contribute. Like, I think it's still pretty hard for people to contribute because we haven't done a great job of like contributing docs and like templates and things like that to help you. But I mean, the nice thing about all of it being open source, or like 95% of it being open source, is that I can send you a link to the code and you can see the logic, and then it's not a question of like, do you trust us or not? You can actually see the code, and you can fix bugs and open pull requests if you notice them, or if you have the time. And I think that it's just, where possible, we want to just do as much as we can in the open, just because it benefits everyone. That's why we do everything on Discord, and anyone can join our Discord server. We do our like stand-up updates on Discord. We chat with like within the team on Discord, and it's public channels that anyone can join and see what we're talking about and what we're working on. And I think that's just like a nice cultural thing to kind of promote transparency and collaboration, so that we can both educate the community, but also have the community be able to help contribute back. Like, for example, that Code Magic guide on how to use Shorebird, it was written entirely by someone in the community. We didn't write that guide. So there's a lot of benefits to doing things in the open beyond just like trust and transparency. And I think we want to just continue as much as possible building in the open for those reasons. So, and for me, my background is with open source, and Eric works a lot with open source. We really value building in the open whenever possible. So that was a big reason why I was also super interested in working with Eric at Shorebird, because we have those same values of like community, building in the open, and collaborating and being accessible to developers all over. So yeah, open source is great.
Cool. Awesome. I think that's it. There's like a lot of questions. We can like maybe send you some of those.
Yeah. If you have more questions, send them my way. I can answer them in like a Google Doc or something, and then share the answers with you. Whatever's easiest, I'm more than happy to. And also, I think send me the questions, because it will be helpful to know if we're missing things in the FAQ. We can update the FAQ as well. Yeah.
Awesome. But it was like really, really clarifying. I think most of the like the biggest questions we went through. Like, it was an awesome Q&A.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad. I'm really honored to be here. Thanks for having me again. One thing that I forgot to mention that maybe people are also, it's worth mentioning, because a lot of folks asked about this, is how does Shorebird work with Flutter? Because as I mentioned, Shorebird forks Flutter. So when you install Shorebird, you also install a version of Flutter that contains the Shorebird engine and all those things. And so for a while, up until very recently, Shorebird would only support the latest stable version of Flutter. So like if you create a release and then we make changes and we upgrade Flutter and then you upgrade Shorebird, you would no longer be able to create patches for older releases, because you would be using a different version of Flutter. And so we've addressed that mostly now. So in the most recent version of Shorebird, we actually support dynamically changing your Flutter version depending on the one that you used to create the release. There's still more work that actually I was working on right before this to make it possible to pick what version you want Shorebird to use, so that you can create a release with a specific Flutter version. Like, let's say your team is still using like whatever Flutter, I don't know, 3.7.10 or something. like right now, it's not possible for you to create a release using that version. It's only possible to create releases with the latest stable version. And that's something that we're also working on addressing so that you can use Shorebird with older Flutter versions. But as you can imagine, that's a big challenge because we have to basically spin up a lot of cloud build infrastructure to build all of these engine components in the cloud for all these different target architectures, going back to really old versions of Flutter. So that's kind of the big challenge there, is just the infrastructure that's needed to actually maintain all those builds for like Windows, Linux, Mac OS, etc. So that's kind of another thing in addition to iOS, is making it so that you can switch between Flutter versions easily. So that's something that's coming soon. But at least right now, we also like support patching older versions. So if you did use Shorebird in an old release, you can continue patching it without any problems. Yeah, that's another common question that people, I know it's not realistic for teams to always be using the latest stable version of Flutter. So we're working on addressing that. Again, it's just priorities. Like we only have 4 people, so we have to pick and choose what we focus on, but that's coming soon. So I figured I'd mention that because you reminded me, and that's a big one for people to be aware of.
Yeah, that's an important one.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
Cool.
Go for it, Eric.
Yeah, so we're coming a little bit of time. So this was awesome, Felix. Thanks again for taking the time to make this presentation for us. I hope everybody learned something. And yeah, that's it for this online, our first online meetup.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was awesome, and hopefully can bring some updates in the future.
Oh yeah. I'll also be doing a talk at the Flutter and Friends conference on Shorebird. So if you're interested in learning more, you can. I'm sure it'll be recorded, or if you're there in person, stop by and say hi. So yeah, there'll be more Shorebird content in the near future.
Awesome, can't wait for it. So all right, I'm gonna close, and thanks everybody that joined, and thanks Pedro, thanks Felix, and see you all soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Yeah.